Hello, FGL World. Last week we had a question about Joseph, who came off a flight and he was in the airport waiting for his bags. He sees Sara, his neighbor. Sara wasn't sure how she was getting home. Joseph told her that he had already ordered a taxi, and Sara asked if he wouldn't mind her joining along. There was room for her. He agreed for her to join. Sara arrived at her house. Joseph turned and said, "I'd like you to pay for half the fee of the taxi ride." And Sara gave the money, but she was wondering afterward whether she was really required to. So last week we started to discuss the concept of when one person benefits from something that somebody else is enabling them to benefit from, but the other person doesn't actually incur loss because of the nature of the benefit. That was the case of the hotel. So at first glance, it would seem that Sara actually doesn't have to pay. There's a precedent for this. For example, Jewish law discusses a case where two people are incarcerated in jail. One guy pays money, and as a result of that one person paying money, both of them get free. So if the court determines that that person A didn't spend any extra money to free the second person, he's actually not entitled to compensation because one person's benefiting off of the other person's action, and he didn't actually have any loss. He was paying the money anyway. But that's only true if he intended. This is what's important here. If he intended to pay those fees for his own sake, and his effort happened to free him. So in the case of the car, one could argue the same thing. If Joseph had intended to go on that taxi ride and to drive that, to go on that taxiing, already he was planning to take the taxi, then Sara really wouldn't have to pay. It would be a case of zenen of zelo chaser. She'd be benefiting, and it's not a loss because Joseph was planning to take the taxi anyway. But there's really a difference between the cases, because in the case of the prisoners, there wasn't really an extra effort, for example, that person A was doing to attain the release of the second prisoner. He just paid, and it was the same legal mechanism that got the second person out. But in the case of the taxi, one could argue that that when Joseph was planning to take the cab, that's different than somebody giving somebody a ride. You give somebody a ride, you're taking them, but a taxi is an expensive activity to do. Therefore, one would say that maybe Joseph, was assuming that she's coming, consenting that she'll join him. That's predicated on the understanding that she would actually pay half the fare, and would actually require her to pay in that case. Additionally, by the way, there may actually be a loss for Joseph. Maybe Joseph wants to ride alone. It's another consideration. Maybe he wants to make a phone call. Maybe he wants a quiet ride. Maybe he wants the space in the car. You could argue a lot of different reasons why how it's calculated, though, would be an interesting question. Whether you would make the person pay half the fare or a quarter of the fare, how that would be calculated, I think, would be an interesting question. But probably in this case, Sara would actually have to pay Joseph part of the taxi ride.